Now, how do we reconcile that? Where people would say, it's none of your business. I've heard, it was Rick Warren, I think, said that, and it was reemphasized by a guy named Mark Driscoll, if you know who he is, but others have said the same thing, is that right here Jesus says, none of your business. Forget about that whole recognizing of the times. So how do I reconcile that with what Jesus said here in Matthew 16? We've already studied it, if you've been studying along in Matthew with me. It says, then the Pharisees and the Sadducees came testing Jesus. They asked him if he would show them a sign from heaven. So without getting into too much detail, once again, signs had already been shown, but again, this is the idea of they're trying to get him to do something where they could find a fault in either things that he would say or do that would be somehow contradictory, or in some way they could bring an accusation against him, against elements of the law. And so they come and they ask these questions. So here's what Jesus says to them. So he answered and he said to them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. And he says, you hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. And here's what he says, a wicked and an adulterous generation seeks after a sign, but no sign will be given to it except for this, the sign of the prophet Jonah. And then he left them and he departed. So he says, I'm going to be dead. You can find the other place where he talks about this, every other instance where he makes mention of the prophet Jonah. But his point is, you guys are not looking for the right things. You're looking for something that is going to meet what you're asking for, but I'm only going to give you the one that is necessary, and that is the one of the sign of Jonah. And that was 3 days as dead, yet brought back to life miraculously so. That's what you're going to see. But the idea that they were supposed to be somehow oblivious and not even be paying attention to the things around them is just nonsense, and it's not even in the least part borne out by what we read just in the scriptures. So here's a great indication where Jesus chastises them for a lack of awareness of the days in which they lived. Jesus would have been someone who fit all the criteria as a Messiah, and here he is standing right in front of them and they don't even have the slightest idea. Instead, they're always trying to entrap him by getting him to say or do something that would be contrary to the law. So his point is, you guys are asking for something, but you're asking for the wrong things. You're so blinded in your opposition to me, you don't even realize that I am the Messiah standing right in front of you. You don't even discern the times in which you live. Let me give you a couple of other examples, and you can read them for yourself so we don't get too bogged down in this. Think about the two books written to, or the two letters written to the Thessalonians. So the first one would be what we understand when it comes to the times that are of the end, where Jesus addresses that. And that would be chapter 14, starting at verse 13. My brethren, I don't want you to be ignorant concerning those who have died, those who have fallen asleep. And then he starts to give the chronology of the events. So, dead in Christ, raised first, we will join them in the air, we'll ever be with him, right? Comfort one another with these words, verse 18. Verse 17 is where we get the rapture of the church. And so rapture taken from the Latin, but the catching up, or the harpazo, is that we are going to be caught up with him in the air. Then he turns his attention to the day of the Lord, the vengeance, the wrath that is coming. The church is removed first, and then the wrath comes. Now notice what he ends up saying in the first couple of verses. Now concerning the day of the Lord, you have no reason that I should tell you these things, because basically you know them perfectly. That means that he told that to them when he was with them. Second one that I can give you is in 2 Thessalonians. Once again, it's all about the signs of the times of the end. And he says, you know these things I taught you when I mentioned these things when I was there with you, chapter 2. But he goes on and he starts to go through the whole sequence of things. And so all the way up to the revealing of the son of perdition, basically the Antichrist, and what will happen to the people who would follow him because they don't have a love for the truth. They'll believe the lies that will be put out there for them. All of that is signs of the times. All of that is about the end of days. It's all eschatological stuff. And in both of those passages that I've cited for you, chapter 4 into 5 of 1 Thessalonians, chapter 2 of 2, he in both of those places saying, I went over this stuff with you. That means that Jesus was teaching this church matters of eschatology, that the end of days In both accounts, in both of the letters, he reminds them we've gone over all of this stuff before. So yeah, Paul was teaching in the first century matters of eschatology to a church that, interestingly enough, was infant. It had just been established. Paul was only with them for 3 weeks, 3 Sabbaths, so who knows how long. So not very long. He was only with them for a matter of weeks, and he was teaching them advanced parts of eschatology and of studying of the end things. So please, I understand if you've heard that from someone else, it's none of our business. Fine. If you've heard that from somebody else and you've repeated it, okay, at least now you can stop doing that, because we have way too much information. Paul is a great example of this, where he talked about matters of the end times prolifically. So did Peter. Read 2 Peter chapter 2 into chapter 3. For goodness sake, man, that's all about end time stuff. And he goes into great detail. So if you hang all of your belief about this stuff off of what Jesus said in chapter 1 of the book of Acts, and you forget about everything that the church taught after those times through Paul and Peter, through James, through Jude, I mean, let's be honest here, come on. Or the book of Revelation for that matter. That's all eschatological stuff, and it should make people look at it and say, when I look at things happening around the world, clearly something is going on here. I don't want to read into events, but if events are clearly spoken about in the text and we see them kind of taking place around us in the big picture, at least pay attention, because we're late in the day and it's supposed to be used for the sake of evangelism, not so that we're somehow making ministries out of end time stuff. It's great. We want to make sure that people are aware of those things, but it's more important just to say there is work for us to be doing here because the days are getting dark. The gospel should be the important part of this. The equipping of the church, preparing them for whatever's going on, getting them fully understanding of what the scripture has to say, because there's a world out there that we should be evangelizing and interacting with, hoping that some of them may come to salvation before God judges. That's what's going on here. So again, I'm trying not to be frustrated and angry about this, but when I hear people say the end times is none of our business, that is said by fools for the reason of just avoiding the topic altogether. Is Jesus going to establish the kingdom? He will at a time known to him or known to the Father for sure, but that's going to be when he sets up the kingdom. But between here and there, we've got a lot of detail about what the world is going to look like before the Lord returns. And when we see it taking place around us, we ought to be paying attention and dig into what the text has to say, not reading into events, but just saying events around the world really do kind of indicate we are in uncharted territory. In our own world right now, there are things happening that even 5 years ago I never even thought. Technologically, we are getting to the point where man is going to be put in the place of incredible subjugation unless God gets to the point of intervention. I can get to so many different topics that we could go through and look at that and see the evidence for it all around. But, suffice to say, what we see around us is pretty obvious. I believe also the reestablishment of the nation of Israel. You hear me say it all the time. But boy, if we think that this unnatural hatred that's growing by the day for them is something that's just unimportant or nothing that's biblical, we're not paying attention, if that's your view. Now, you can disagree with me, that's fine. But for those who might have not thought through this and might agree with me after hearing that, wonderful. Great. Are we supposed to try to put a date on when that's going to be? The timing of the events is up to God. But the ability to look at the world around us and recognize something's different, that's not what Jesus was talking about in Acts chapter 1, and it's borne out by the other writers in the New Testament who speak about end times it's basically all over the New Testament. So we ought to make sure that we understand that you can't compare apples and oranges. What Jesus says in Acts chapter 1 versus all of the prophetic things about the end times that the other writers are talking about, those are two entirely different things. The establishment of the kingdom is something known to God, but the signs and what things look like of bringing to us what is an awareness, that's not something that we should ignore or just kind of postpone or not even think about. We should be paying attention to those things. If you have questions on any of what I've shared here, please, again, contact me through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net, and I'd love to hear from you, answer whatever questions you might have, get you information on the Israel trip. Love to do any of those things, and so I'd look forward to hearing from you. And we will pick up at chapter 20 as we get together next Thursday.